Good morning, classmate, and to our teacher, Sir Bon. Me and my partner, Jessica Rios, assigned to report the new emerging genres of literature. We have the objectives. At the end of the lesson, the students should be able to determine new emerging genres of literature and discuss the elements and characteristics of these genres. We have 3 assigned to report. Number 1 is creative writing, non-fiction. Number 2, hyperpoetry. And number 3 is Chiklet or Czech literature. Creative non-fiction is a genre of writing that uses elements of creative writing to present a factual, true story. Literary techniques that are usually reserved for writing fiction can be used in creative non-fiction, such as dialogue, scene settings, and narrative arcs. We have a characteristics of creative non-fiction. Number 1 is fact. The writing must be based on fact rather than fiction. It cannot be made up. It can be real life situation. Number 2, extensive research. The pace of writing is based on primary research. When we say extensive research, may pinagkunan or may source kung saan kinuha. Number 3 is reporting. The writer must be able to document events or personal experience. Creative nonfiction is based on personal experience of the writer. Number 3, personal experience or opinion. Often, the writer includes personal experience, feeling, thoughts, and opinions. We all know that creative nonfiction, the writer must include the experience, feelings, thoughts, and opinions. Number 4, exposition. The writer required to explain the personal experience or the topic to the reader. Number 6, essay format. Creative nonfiction is often written in essay format. Example, personal essay, literary, journalistic essay, brief essay. We have the elements of creative nonfiction. Number 1, settings. Each story has a settings where the story takes place. Usually, an effective story establishes its settings early. Number 2, descriptive imagery. It usually involves description of the 5 senses. It is the way the writer points the scene or image in the mind of the reader. Number 3, plot. Plot is the actual events that takes place within the bounds of narrative. Under of this is the scope, sequence, and pacing. Number 5, scope. Refers to the boundaries of the plot. Where and when does the story begins and ends? What focus, what the background information and details does the story requires? Number 6, sequence. The order of events determine the reader experience on how to write the sequence of the story. It includes the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Number 7, non-linear narrative. May told in the series of flashback or vignettes. It might jump back and forth in time. Number 8, pacing. While scope determines the boundaries of the plot and sequencing determines where the plot goes, pacing determines how quickly reader move through the story. Number 9, characters. Character is important in the story. It brings life to the story. Sometimes there are non-human characters can be used like animals or environment. We have types of character. Flat characters are mainly detailed only briefly. Number 2, static character. Remain the same throughout the story. Dynamic character. Change within the story. Number 9, point of view. It depends on the readers on how he or she understands the story. We have 3 points of view. Number 1, first person point of view. Narrator uses first person. Example is I, me, mine, or us, we, ours. Second person point of view. Narrator uses second person pronouns. Example is you and your. Number 3, third person limited. Narrator uses third person's pronouns. Example, he, him, his, she, her, hers, they, theirs. Number 11, lastly, dialogue. Without dialogue, we cannot understand the story. This is the communication of 2 or more characters. Good dialogue often demonstrates the traits of the character in the story. Then we proceed to the types of created nonfiction. Number 1, personal essay. Creative nonfiction can be written by the author's personal experience or single event that can have a lesson learned. Number 2, memoir. The writing constructs a true story about time or period in his life, or had a significant personal meaning and universal truth. The writer composes a story using the first person. It can be personal essay, but the difference is it's all about the life of the writer that composed, or it can be the writer has passed away and that is called memoir. Number 3, literary journalism essay. The literary journalism essay is all about the topic of issue in the environment using literary device or figurative language. Number 4, autobiography. The writer composes his/her life story from birth to present using the first person I. Number 5, travel writing. Created nonfiction can be travel writing. It's all about the adventure of the writer using literary device. Lastly, food writing. It's all about food. Using literary devices as well. Now we proceed to the hyperpoetry. Hypertext poetry is a subgenre of digital poetry. Digital poetry is sometimes referred to as e-poetry, electronic poetry, and cyber poetry. The genre mostly falls into 2 subgenres: interactive poetry and hypertext poetry. Poetry beyond text. And we have the example of hyperpoetry. The title is Do You Believe? And the elements of hyperpoetry. We have kairos. Kairos in Greek refers to the right times or season or opportunity. Timeliness of an argument. To be successful, it needs appropriate tone and structure and come at the right time. Number 2, audience. The audience plays an interactive role in the navigating and reading a hypertext poetry, brings the reader away from the verbal narrative. Hypertext is on the trend to become increasingly more popular in upcoming years as more and more writers use digital media to create or publish works. Number 3, content. Content can include the traditional components of poem which are word, lines, and stanza. Number 4, formal features. It includes hypertextual features which are composed of hyperlinks that leads to nonlinear reading of the text. Lastly, ancestral genres. One's ancestral genres to hypertext poetry is the hypertext. Allows a reader to have interactive experience with the text through the use of hyperlinks. When someone clicks on bring the reader to another website, hyperlinks referred to as example URL, HTTP, and HTMLS. And for the example of hypertext poetry, I will introduce Jessica Rios.
So, for the continuation of the topic of hyper poetry, so notable example of hypertext poetry is the penetration and low probability of recon. So, penetration is a well-known example of hypertext poem. The poem is from the collection The Season, which was published in 2000 by S. Gate. So the collection consists of two poems, Disposition and Penetration. The poem is set up so that the reader had choice to begin the poem through different perspectives. For example, by clicking on daylight, the poem is the perspective of the daughter or the Rosario. Then the path of the poem is dictated by what the reader chooses after each passage. By clicking one of the series of choices and below the passage or the Rosario. So, about the low probability of recons, it is a website that's set up by Peter Howard, also well known as digital poet for some of his work, some of which includes hyperlinks, his own hypertext poetry. So, this is the notable example of hypertext poetry. So, for the continuation, we will proceed to Chik lit or Chik literature. So, it says that it consists of heroine-centered narratives that focus on the trials and tribulation of their individual protagonists. It often addresses issues of modern womanhood, from romantic relationship to female friendship to matters in the workplace in humorous and lighted-hearted ways. So, chick lit or chick lit literature is all about uh, the protagonist of this literature is the women. So, what is all about? It is the womanhood. Ito yung pakikipagsapalaran ng isang babae sa kwento, which is ang kanyang yan ay mga issues, fashion style, yun. Tapos, ina-address din dito yung modern womanhood from romantic relationship to female friendship that matters workplace in humorous and lighted ways. So, lagi nyo lang tatandaan na ang chick lit or chick literature, it means the protagonist is the women. Okay, next is there are certain elements all chick lit novels have in common. So, Meron daw pagkakapareho ang chick lit novels or chick lit literature novels. First is they all features a woman in her 20s or 30s as a protagonist. So, ang gumaganap na babae doon sa chick literature ay sa edad na 20s or nasa 30 siya. So, next, the novels are mostly set in urban. So, ang setting kasi, karaniwan kasi ang setting ng chick lit literature is sa urban environments. Mostly, notably, New York or London. Yon. Tapos, the next is the protagonists are career women. So, siyempre, pag sinabing chick-lit, so, ang protagonist ay ang career woman. So, next is, the protagonists are often single, although they usually all end up with someone. Sa, ang bida dun sa chick-lit ay, minsan ay single, minsan naman ay, may, it will end up in a relationship. So, next is a fashion often plays a big role in a chick lit novel. So, sa chick literature ang often plays ang pinakang big role sa chick lit novels ay ang fashion, which is correct because woman is more on passion. So the characters can either be obsessed with it, or the plot itself can be centered around fashion industry. Yun nga. Like what I said earlier, that the big role of the protagonist of the chick literature is the fashion industry. So the book covers often reflect this trend. They may feature articles of clothing. So kaya like what I said earlier, fashion, more on passion. Yan. So clothing, martinis, parties yan. Mga parties, other symbol of glamorous lifestyle of a woman. So, and next is, yan. Here's the example of chick lit literature. So, When Life Gives You Lemons by Lauren Weisberger, The Regulars by George Clark, and Ayesha at Last by Uzma. So, yan. Here's the example of chick lit literature. So, thank you for listening. That's all for for our report. Thank you.